Born August 23, 1754, in Versailles, this king of France loved hunting and eating. He was very interested in science and geography, and probably should have been a locksmith, because he definitely stunk at being a king. He was indecisive and easily influenced, but he did manage to restore the powers of Parliament. He couldn't make a decision about the representation of the Third Estate, and when he finally ordered that the three estates meet separately, the Third Estate refused. What did the king do about it? Nothing. He also did a number of other things to fuel the revolution. Or, he didn't do a number of things, and the revolution was fueled by this inaction. He refused to approve the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the August Decrees of 1789. He was then moved to Paris, and after the Revolution of October 5th, and tried to escape June 20th, 1791, which failed. To try to regain his power, he declared war on Austria, which actually sped up his removal from the throne, so that backfired. Louis was suspended, became a prisoner of the Commune of Paris, and was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death by January 21st. Born on November 2nd, 1755 in Vienna, Austria, in 1770 she married Louis XVI, who, 4 years later, became king, making her Queen of France. She was frivolous and imprudent in her actions and choice of friends. She was disliked by the court and country. She became a symbol of the extravagance of the court. She was moved to Paris with her husband on October 5th, 1789, and after they attempted to escape and were caught at Varennes on June 21st, 1791, she was convinced the only way to save the monarchy was through foreign intervention. So, she sought the aid of her brother, the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II. She believed that France would be easily defeated given the weakened condition of the army, so she favored the declaration of war on Austria in April of 1792. But, on August 10, 1792, Parisians stormed the Tuileries Palace and ended the monarchy. She was imprisoned on August 13th in the Temple with her family, but was moved to the Concierge on August 1st, 1793. Her escape attempts failed, and she was charged with aiding the enemy and inciting civil war within France. She was found guilty and condemned to death. Marie Antoinette was executed by the guillotine on October 16, 1793, and aroused sympathy by her dignity and courage before the execution. In the early morning of October 5, 1789, a large group of French women met in the marketplace of Paris. The women wanted to force the high prices of bread down. Because Versailles was a symbol of the excessive luxuries reserved for the king and his court, this was the natural destination for the angry French women who wanted to feed their families. Plus, rumors had spread that the queen was hoarding grain there. Bread was a majority of the diet of the French people. They spent half their income on bread. The citizens were so desperate for food that they began resorting to desperate measures. As they marched through the streets, more women left their homes and joined the march. All were armed. When the crowd of 7,000 women, and some men, marched 11 miles and arrived at Versailles, the king was so awestruck by the crowd that he gave in quickly to their demands. He ordered that all bread in Versailles be delivered to the people to Paris. They then got Lafayette and the National Guard to escort the king and his family to Paris, where they were kept at the Palace of Tuileries. They were jeered at and treated almost like prisoners. The women broke in later that night to kill the queen. They murdered 3 guards and put their heads on pikes. Louis was sentenced after the events of August 10th, where the Palace of Tuileries was overthrown, and the crowd forced the Legislative Assembly to suspend the king. When the National Convention succeeded the Legislative Assembly, they charged him for treason. His execution was to be held the next day. He spent his last evening saying goodbye to his wife and children. He arose to a cold and wet morning at around 5 a.m. At 8 a.m., a guard escorted him and the priest, Henry Essex, to his execution. He was not allowed to speak or be spoken to without witness. The priest offered him his breviary to read, which he did calmly. The streets were lined with citizens, all armed. There were drums in front of the horses for the purpose of drowning out any speaking in favor of the king. When 3 guards surrounded him, he disconcerted them by undressing himself, but he refused to let them bind him. He walked across the scaffold and said his last words.
I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. I pardon those who have occasioned my death, and I pray to God that the blood you are going to shed may never be visited on France.
Dragged him under the guillotine. He was not positioned right, and the blade sunk into his jaw. The executioner and his assistant had to push on to finish the job. At first there was an awful silence. but soon there were cries of
Vive la République!
and hats were thrust in the air. Many tried to obtain some of his blood, as it was said to possess healing powers. Joseph Ignace Guillotine, a physician and member of the new French government, argued there should be an equal and humane death for all citizens. The guillotine was invented to allow all citizens this right, and thus was named after him. The first guillotine was designed by Antoine Louis, a surgeon and a friend of guillotines. It was built by a harpsichord maker by the name of Tobias Schmidt. It was first tested on a sheep by the chief executioner Charles Henry Sanson. The machine was further refined by Leo Berger 100 years later. The first execution using the guillotine was conducted by Jacques Nicolas Pelletier in 1792. The guillotine soon became the preferred method of death and was used on political prisoners as well as common prisoners. Public opinion turned against the guillotine after Madame du Barry was executed. Her sobs and cries of terror brought humanity back into the killing. It is estimated that by 1799, 15,000 people had been executed on the guillotine. Even the leaders of the Reign of Terror, including Maximilien Robespierre, were executed by the blade.
Do I wake up? Wait. I can't.
France. He da 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 da.
Over here again. No, don't record. No, don't record this.
Alright, that was awful.
Tyler. You still recording this? Those mini swords? Oh! Yeah. No, are you recording this?